So let's say you've realized that your partner isn't emotionally abusive, they're not manipulative, they're not a narcissist, but they are emotionally immature, so they avoid hard conversations. They struggle to take responsibility. They shut down or deflect or get defensive anytime you try to talk about something serious. But you care about them and you want to stay together. So now you're wondering, can this relationship still work without me losing my mind? Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we talk about the hidden ways that childhood trauma and emotional patterns shape our relationships, and we do this so that we can finally start living our lives on our own terms.
Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow and I appreciate it so much.
When your partner is emotionally immature, it's so tempting to try to fix them. You want to explain things better. You want to try harder to help them. You bring in tools. You send them articles. Most of these end up never opened, never watched, and they clutter their trash bin. But still, you try. You have one more conversation to finally make them understand. But that strategy usually backfires anyway. Not because you're wrong for wanting to help them or because you shouldn't want growth or maturity in your relationship, but because, well, it's not your job to drag someone into emotional maturity. When you try to wake someone up to their immaturity, their natural response is often to push back. So instead of doing this, let's talk about how to show up differently yourself because, well, it works better. And how to do it in a way that lets you protect yourself a little bit and that helps you set compassionate boundaries and maybe, just maybe, make a dent in how your partner shows up too. Because when you change your contribution, it doesn't necessarily change what your partner does, but it does change the overall dynamic of the whole relationship. And maybe the relationship works and maybe it doesn't, but either way, this is the path forward that lets you act with integrity and without losing yourself in the process. The first thing you need to know when you're dating someone who's emotionally immature is you're going to get baited. Not the malicious kind of baiting you'd see with a true narcissist, but you will get pulled into roles that you didn't exactly sign up for, like being your partner's therapist, or the fixer, or the emotional regulator. And most of this will happen most often when you're trying to be honest, when you're trying to have real and transparent conversations. So, for example, you'll say, hey, when you did this, I felt hurt. But suddenly the conversation shifts and now you're defending your tone or you're defending your timing or your motives for bringing it up in the first place, or you're defending your entire personality. So that instead of talking about what hurt you or the problem you're having, you're now stuck debating whether it's even a big deal in the first place. And if you're not careful, this becomes a pattern. You bring something up, your partner reacts, and then you spend the whole conversation managing their reactions instead of the issue you brought up in the first place. And over time, it wears you down. Maybe it exhausts you completely. And eventually, you just stop bringing things up altogether. So what can you do instead? How do you stop this pattern before it turns into resentment? Because that's the natural pathway. You start by not taking the bait. You don't explain yourself into exhaustion. You don't react to every deflection or every guilt trip. You don't get sucked into the vortex of having to justify every detail about how or why you're bringing something up, because that's not how you get to connection. And it's not how you're going to get your partner to understand you anyway. Instead, you hold your ground. You say what's true once or twice, and then you let it sit with them. Because maturity is not about how well you explain. You anchor yourself to what you know is true and to the point you're trying to make, and then you let your partner take it from there. When you're in a relationship with someone emotionally immature, empathy is a strength, but it can also become a trap for you because emotional immaturity often comes from some kind of painful backstory. So your partner might have grown up in an emotionally unstable home, like many of us did. So they might be carrying shame and they might genuinely not know how to do better. And your heart wants to understand that. You get why they struggle. You see the good in them. And that's good and healthy to be able to see that. But understanding someone's pain, it doesn't mean you have to tolerate the harm it causes. So you can have empathy for your partner without abandoning your own needs in the process. That means not letting "I understand why they're like this" become "so I guess I have to keep tolerating it no matter what." Which means that you are allowed to say, "I love you. I understand this is hard for you, but the way you're showing up to this relationship, it's not working for me. I need you to show up in a different way so that we can both be happy." Empathy says, "I get it." Enabling says, "I'll just carry the weight for both of us." And that's not sustainable for one person. It's tempting to do, but it wears you out, and it wears out the emotional connection. One of the biggest mistakes we make when we try to relate and grow with an emotionally immature partner is asking them for a personality change instead of a behavior change. You can't ask someone to be more mature and expect them to automatically know what to do with that. That kind of request, it sounds vague, it sounds judgmental sometimes, and frankly, it's impossible to respond to, especially for someone who's already defensive or avoidant or just out of touch with their own emotions. But here is what you can do. You can ask for specific behaviors that would make the relationship safer for you and that would help you feel like your own needs are met. So it's useful for you to ask for things like, "When I bring something up, I need you to stay in the conversation instead of shutting down or leaving the room." Or, "I need us to take turns talking instead of interrupting or escalating the conversation into an argument." These kinds of requests are doable. They don't require someone to completely change who they are. They just require effort and a little bit of thought. And someone who wants to grow and continue having a relationship with you, they will usually try. Even if they fumble or if they're a little bit slow to change their behavior, they will try, and you'll notice that. But if your partner consistently dismisses your needs or walks away from conversations or lashes out every time you ask for something basic, then you'll know that they're not interested in participating, and then that's a different conversation altogether. Something to note about being in a relationship with someone emotionally immature means that things can get a little bit messy. Your partner might have trouble regulating their own emotions, so they might shut down because that's the way they're used to handling things. They might easily slide into guilt or blame or defensiveness the moment that anything feels uncomfortable, because that's what we do when we're uncomfortable sitting with hard conversations, or when we're uncomfortable sitting with our own feelings or a partner's feelings. And if you're not careful, you can be very tempted to start matching that energy. They raise their voice, you raise yours. They withdraw, you insist harder. They guilt trip you and you over-explain yourself. And instead of one person being dysregulated, now you have two people being dysregulated, which means that the anchor of at least one partner being more emotionally mature, it disappears. And that eats even further at the stability and the safety of the whole dynamic. So your job, and I say that with compassion, is to stay regulated even when your partner cannot. And I know how hard that is to do and maybe unfair sometimes. No one is saying that you have to do this and that everything rests on you being emotionally regulated for both people. But if you want to help to improve such a relationship, this is one way that you can do that. And this might mean taking a break mid-conversation when things get too heated, or talking about what's happening without having to defend every single word that comes out of your mouth. Saying, "I'm open to talking, but not like this," meaning I can't speak to you when you raise your voice to me or when you're mean to me. Or just pausing and breathing instead of over-explaining yourself. You don't have to do this perfectly. You don't have to be a monk, but you do have to hold your emotional ground more than your emotionally immature partner so that you're not constantly being swept up in their moment of emotional dysregulation, because their inability to manage their own emotions, it doesn't have to become your responsibility. You can help them by managing yourself, but they still have to jump in at some point and participate. Another thing you can do is set boundaries that you intend to enforce. What a lot of people will do to boycott themselves is set boundaries, but they don't enforce them because they set the wrong boundaries. But a boundary that's not enforced is just a mild suggestion, and suggestions don't protect you. They train the other person to stop taking your words seriously, and they they dilute your credibility in the end. They quietly teach your nervous system that your needs don't matter. So if you set a boundary, follow through. That's why I say set boundaries you intend to enforce. Instead of vague warnings or emotional ultimatums, be clear and super direct. If we fight and you disappear for days, I'm not going to chase you. I'll pause the conversation until you reach out to me, and then we can talk like adults. So a good boundary tells the other person, here's how I will take care of myself when this pattern shows up. And you don't need to be mean about this or dramatic, just clear. So ask yourself, what are my non-negotiables? How far am I willing to bend for my partner? And where do I keep betraying my own needs just to avoid any conflict? And if you're not sure, start there. Start by clarifying these things to yourself. Here's where things get a little bit murky, because you might want to be patient. You might want to be the bigger person. You might even feel like it's loving to wait for someone to grow. And sometimes it is. But patience without self-respect can turn very quickly into you abandoning yourself and then hating the whole relationship. So how do you tell the difference? Well, patience feels like I'm giving you room to grow into this relationship and to mature along with it, but I'm still taking care of myself. And self-abandonment feels like I'm twisting myself into knots so that I don't lose you. And over time, the signs that you're abandoning yourself will start to show up more and more. And they'll look like you constantly feeling anxious before every single conversation you have to have with your partner. You walking on eggshells to avoid setting your partner off or to avoid setting them off in a bad mood. You over-explaining or justifying their behavior to all your friends and family. You ignoring what you need from them to feel loved just to keep a peaceful environment. These are red flags, not necessarily about them, but about your own position in the relationship. So check in with yourself regularly and ask yourself, am I being compassionate or am I disappearing altogether? Because one is an act of love and the other is a very slow erosion of your self-worth and eventually of the relationship anyway. There are going to be moments in every relationship when one person is doing more of the emotional heavy lifting. That's normal. But if you're always the one doing all of the emotional work and you're always the one calming things down, initiating repair, offering tools to your partner, doing the self-reflection, and showing up with renewed intention and energy, that's not a relationship anymore. It's just a one-person performance on your part. And it's not that hard to slip into that. I know how tempting it is to keep trying and to keep thinking, if I just phrase it better this time, if I just stay calm, maybe they'll stay calm too. Or if I just lead by example, but you can't keep handing someone emotional roadmaps and hoping they follow them. At some point, they have to want to get better at the hard relational stuff on their own. Because otherwise, you'll end up parenting your partner instead of partnering with them. And once that dynamic sets in, the power balance shifts. And from there, resentment grows and it grows fast. So ask yourself, am I doing all of the emotional labor here? Do they ever take the lead on repair, on reflection, on emotional regulation? Because even if someone is emotionally immature, if they care, they'll at least make attempts. And if they don't, that will be clear too. And that tells you everything you need to know. A lot of emotionally immature people will tell you they want to grow. They'll say the right things. They'll agree with your concerns. They'll make promises that sound good. But words are not exactly the measure of maturity. Only capacity and action can show that. So instead of asking, did they say they'll work on it? Ask, do they actually have the tools? And are they doing anything different now than they did last time? Watch for the little things. Can they regulate their own emotions at least half of the time? Can they reflect on their own impact in the relationship without collapsing or attacking you in the process? Do they come back and clean up their own mess after a fight? Because good intentions without capacity equals more disappointment, and capacity without action leads to exactly the same. And if you get stuck waiting on potential, if you keep holding out hope for who this person can be once they mature, you're going to miss seeing what they're actually doing. So yes, be kind, be hopeful even, but stay in reality, because reality is the only thing that you can build a relationship on. So here's the bottom line. You can love someone who's still learning. Absolutely. You can help them mature and help them grow. You can even choose to stay if you're still getting enough back to make it worth it. But you don't have to become their emotional parent. You don't have to do all the work for them, because you're not going to be happy doing that either. And you definitely don't have to lose yourself to make the relationship function. So if you're in something right now that's stretching you to your max, just know that there's a difference between stretching to help your partner and snapping altogether. Start with small things. Speak the truth without over-explaining. Ask for behavior changes, not personality makeovers. Watch what your partner does, not just what they say they're going to do. And don't be afraid to protect your own emotional well-being. Let me know in the comments if any of this sounds familiar, especially if you've ever found yourself doing all of the emotional labor in the relationship. And I know many of you have. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please like and consider subscribing. Until next time.